Welcome to the Live Like It's True podcast. Here on the show, my guests and I talk through some of the most interesting and astonishing stories of the Bible. And then we ask, how can we live like this story is true? I'm your host, Shannon Popkin. I am an author, a speaker, and a Bible teacher. And here on the podcast, I'm inviting you to think of these stories in the Bible as containers for truth. Each one gives you a new way to reject the lies, to rehearse the truth, and to invite other people to do the same. So I hope that this episode is going to inspire you to better know the story, share the story, and live like the story is true. Hope Blanton and Christine Gordon, welcome back to Live Like It's True.
Thank you. It's so fun that you're having us back.
I just appreciate your time to return. You spoke with me last time. The title is Breakthrough Faith After Chronic Suffering and Hopelessness. Was such a popular episode. Had so many great responses to that one. So if our listeners haven't listened to that one, you're going to want to circle back after this conversation. We talked about the bleeding woman, the woman who reached out and touched Jesus. Such an important conversation. But let me just introduce, if listeners have not met you yet, you guys are the co-authors of At His Feet Studies. I just love your books. They're thin books. I like that. You guys keep them, you're in and out.
That's
Mine
right.
tend to they get fatter. I have so many words and I struggle with that. But you do observation, commentary, application, and you come at it from two different angles. Hope, you are a wife, mom, and a biblical counselor. So you love asking really good questions and drawing out all the feels and all that, helping people to relate personally to the text. And then Christine, you are wife, mom, seminary graduate, Covenant Theological Seminary. You've served on different women's ministry teams, and you love to excavate the deep biblical truths and make them easy to understand for people. You do have such beautiful gifts that pair up. So tell us what's your most recent At His Feet study.
Our most recent one that actually just launched in January was Colossians, and we're really excited about it. It's 10 weeks, and what's so fun is we're doing something new where we used to do some videos that went along with our different Bible studies, but now we're doing podcast episodes that sync up with extra information about each lesson. So that's been really fun. But yeah, Colossians is out now. We're excited about it.
I saw that, and it's sort of like, sometime in your week and you're on your way to work or whatever, just listen. It'll just help the listeners to relate more to what you're going to be talking about in the study that week, right?
Yep.
Right. And it's we both did pilot studies for Colossians. And so we take the places where the women in our studies either got stuck or had more questions, or places that seemed really helpful to sit in for a little bit. And so we just made that a conversation on our podcast and kind of sit in those places. So you can do it. I listen to podcasts while I fold laundry. I don't like to fold laundry. So it's, what's that called? Like
coupling or whatever, pairing.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So whenever. They're short.
I love that. Ooh, you made me even more excited about those. The sticking points. That's what I really want to hear you guys talk about. So
and they're only like 12 minutes an episode. So it's just, it's not a whole lot of commitment.
Yeah.
That's right. Not a whole lot of commitment. That's right.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. So today we're in the middle of the Sarah series here on Live Like It's True, and celebrating the launch of my new book, Shaped by God's Promises, Lessons from Sarah on Fear and Faith. And so I'm just so excited to get this book in the hands of readers. And I just love Sarah's life and her story. But I have to say, this one that we're going to be talking about is, I think, my favorite one. So maybe I might say that about others too, but in the moment, this is my favorite one. I think they're all important for different ways. And I just love that I get to have this conversation with you. But there's going to be a component in this story where we're talking about eavesdropping. And I wonder if either of you, I don't know, do you have any tendency to eavesdrop?
I'm a major eavesdropper. I don't know, Chris, I don't know if you are, but I am and I think it's the counselor in me trying to always hear stories and understand things. I mean, I'm like listening in while we're in the grocery store, at a restaurant. I mean, my family's like, Mom, hello, come over here. So, I don't know that I've ever gotten a huge, juicy tidbit from that, but I've got my ears wide open in all the spaces for something.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing, but it's not for me. It's more like I'm hearing stories, and I mean, I have actually taken a couple stories in places and used them as illustrations in talks that I
Ooh.
do. So, like, I'm excavating, I'm like,
Ooh.
oh, yeah, yeah, we're going to use that one. So,
There
Oh,
you
no.
go
same
with your
thing.
excavating again. I love it.
That's right.
You're
Yeah.
always, got your feelers out. Well, I was thinking back to when I was in college, a time where I was eavesdropping on some people who were talking about me.
Ooh,
And this was
ouch.
a painful moment for me. Okay, so I am a Michigan girl, and back in college, I was from Michigan, went to
Mhm.
school at Liberty in Virginia. And
Mm,
so this weekend, a friend had invited a bunch of us girls to her house. I think it was maybe I don't think it was in Virginia, but some southern state.
mm.
And so southern hospitality and charm, I just didn't have it. And so I was sorely lacking all of those things, and didn't know it. And so the girl's mother had at some point said something to me that I did not hear exactly what she said. And so in response, I did not say, pardon me. I did not say, excuse me. I did not
Oh,
say,
no.
ma'am. Those all would have been really nice
Ooh.
choices. What I
Yes.
said, what I said was, huh?
Which was a no-no.
Not,
That's a no-no.
Uh-uh.
not real
That's
charming.
right.
Are
Another
either,
no-no.
do you know this like by experience, Hope? Is this like
Yeah, and Texas is different than like deep South, but I know this from, and Chris, you lived in Savannah. I mean, like
I was going to say,
you
I lived in
respond to
Savannah,
respect
Georgia.
with the elders, right? Like it's yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, come again, ma'am. Like, my husband is very much drilled those things in.
uh, uh, yes, come
Yeah.
again, ma'am. That would have been a nice choice too. But huh? No, that was not
Right.
good. And my friends were in
Mhm.
the other room talking. Did you hear how she responded to this
Oh my gosh.
mother? Did you hear she said, huh? I can't believe she said that. And I in the other room just dying. I'm like, oh my
Oh,
word. I felt
Oh,
horrible. But
yes, you
boy, did
did.
I learn that mistake the hard way. I
yes.
never said huh again to
Yeah.
anyone.
I bet you were
Uh,
yes, ma'am, in it the rest of the weekend.
oh, yes,
Uh-huh.
I was. Oh, yes, I was. So, I mean, eavesdropping I think we all do it, right? But to hear what somebody else thinks about you, from another room. Now, let's add on to this to hear what God thinks.
Hmm.
Or to have God
Imagine.
hear your private thoughts. Like we're going deep here. This is a
Yeah.
moment. And okay, so we're going to be looking at Genesis 18, 1 through 15. But I kind of want to just really quickly summarize the beginning part. We got to do the beginning part of the story, but I mostly want to get to that second part. Is that okay with you guys if I just kind of
Yeah.
contract
100%.
the beginning part? So let me just tell this part of the story. So Abraham, it's like middle of the day, heat of the day, and he is sitting in the door of his tent and he looks up and behold, this is such a storytelling word. It's like the text says,
Okay.
behold, there were three men standing in front of him. And so he gets hospitality man of the year. He goes running, he's greeting them. He's like, please come in, don't pass by. I want to bring some water. I want to bring some food. I want you to be refreshed under the tree, here, sit down. And so they say, sure, we'll stay. And so he goes into Sarah and says, quick, make some bread. And he under promises, over delivers. He's like, let a little morsel be brought. And then he makes this huge amount or has her make this
Yeah.
huge amount. And they kill the fatted calf and all this expense and trouble is gone too. And so the guests are sitting under this tree and Abraham now stands by and he's like waiting on them. It's this beautiful hospitality. So then we come to the part where the visitor, there's three of them, they ask something about Sarah. So who wants to read verses 9 through 15 for us? We're in the ESV translation. God's promises are like a set of parentheses. The first one is when he makes the promise. The second one is when he keeps it. And you never have one without the other. But often there's this long stretch between the two, much longer than we first imagined, right? That's what we see in Sarah's story found in Genesis 12 through 21. God promised a son, but in this wide stretch between the parentheses, she wondered, would God keep his promises? Could he? I'm Shannon Popkin, inviting you to come find the answer to those questions, both for Sarah and yourself, in my brand new 6-week Bible study titled Shaped by God's Promises, Lessons from Sarah on Fear and Faith. Find out how you too can be shaped by God's promises in the waiting.
Yeah, I can read that. Verse 9, they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She's in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have this pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "No, but you did
Oh, but you did.
But you did. Okay.
Okay, so we've got Abraham is standing by as like serving the guests are under a shade tree in the heat of the day, and Sarah is nearby in a
laugh."
tent behind them, listening at the tent flap. And so, what's interesting or surprising here in this story?
Oh, so many things, I
Oh, I
think.
know. I was going to say,
I
like,
mean,
where do we begin?
yeah.
God is
I mean, I
having
think
lunch
the
with them. That's
right,
interesting.
right, right. Yeah.
Right?
Here's a theophany, right? Like
Yeah.
meaning a God showing up with skin on in the Old Testament, but they don't know it at first. I think they're really there to talk to Sarah.
Hmm.
And Abraham's kind of like secondary. I mean, he's important, but their whole aim, if you think about how this whole story goes, is like she thinks she's eavesdropping, but they're actually talking to her. I love that, like,
Yes.
the
Hmm.
whole thing is about her. She's like being the good Middle Eastern wife, staying in the tent where she should have been. I mean, the whole scene is like they just come in with a purpose.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting too, Christine, because I wonder if that question, where is Sarah? First of all, how do they know her name?
Hmm.
And
Yes.
and how do they know her new name? Because if you look at the chapter before, that's when her name got changed. So they not only know he A has a wife, B her name is Sarah, but C it's her brand new name that she, just got. And so I think this is perhaps their first indication that this is not just any old, maybe Abraham knew, he certainly reacted as though they were royalty, but this is like, okay, there's something supernatural going on here. But if you look back at that
Yes.
chapter before, there isn't any new information imparted here. It's
Mm.
like
Hmm.
God just visited Abraham and told him about a year from now, you're going to have a son and your wife, where it's like all the unknowns are now becoming explicit. It's going to be
Right.
through
Yes.
Sarah, you're going to have a son about a year from now. I mean, he has all those details. So
Yes.
why come back and talk to Sarah? What do you think?
Chris, when you were saying, I think he's really there to talk to Sarah and not Abraham, right? And I don't know the cultural context, but I'm sure at this point, like men and women are eating separate, or possibly, right? Like
Yes.
she wouldn't have been sitting with them, but they know she'd be in earshot. Shannon, you saying how in the chapter before we know that God is already telling Abraham this, but we don't see God telling Sarah. And then here he comes and gets close to her and tells her that feels
Mhm.
very gracious and specific that he would come and make that appearance to her. I don't know. Chris, what were your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking that this question feels very much to me like God's question in the garden after they sinned, right? God doesn't ask where they are or did you eat of the fruit, like, because he doesn't know. He's not information seeking,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
he knows what they've done. And this to me feels like saying, "Where is Sarah?" It's like the same reason in the garden that they asked the question, it's to elicit a response to reconnect to God and like to be in relationship and have that, like he's asking for a heart revelation from them and for them to say or to even reveal to themselves where they really are in terms
Yeah.
of
Right.
him and sin. And I think we assume that Sarah knew too. She knew all those
Right.
details that Abraham would have told her. And so this is like in my head I hear him saying, "What's going on inside your heart there, Sarah?" when he's not really saying those words, but he knows where she is, you know? So it
Mhm.
feels
Right.
like the same use of a question to me. It's a searching, relate to me question, not an information seeking question.
100%.
It's so true. There is sort of a contrast there where Abram is out beside the tree and Sarai is back in the tent. And I did read one commentator in let's see, the book is called Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes. And so the author was talking with Middle Eastern people and they were bringing critique to Sarah. Like a Bedouin society, she would have been serving, but I do think that Sarah does not see herself as part of the promise.
Mhm.
Genesis 16, Ishmael's born. That was 9, I think, years ago. And for all of those many years, Sarah has now felt like, okay, God made the promise. God kept the promise through Ishmael, and I am completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this little scene, she's just not in on it. And I love that you brought
Mhm.
out how Hope you said it just feels so personal, so intimate. Like God came to lunch at her table.
Mm.
And I mean, do you ever
Mhm.
feel like God is so distant and he doesn't it just feels like, oh, would he even know? Does he even need me to be involved in any part of his, kingdom purposes? I think women
Right.
feel that way. Do you?
Yeah. And I'm like visualizing her, they're having a conversation and she's like zoned out, right? Because she knows she's not included. She feels forgotten, right? Yeah, 9 years from this other baby being born. She still has not had a child. God told Abraham that she would, but she hasn't. I mean, just you can imagine that she's just kind of checked out and probably in a lot of pain emotionally. And so
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then all of a sudden she hears her name. Someone says her name. And it's like, oh wait, someone's saying my name. And then, oh, now you're talking about this thing that is super personal and super
Mhm.
like her deepest heart desire.
Mhm.
And I just can't imagine all the different emotions that are going through her in that moment. And I think for some women, when there has been so long where they feel like God has not heard them, God is not responding, it just creates this time of deep pain and cynicism.
Yeah.
And also like, I don't want to hope because that's too
Yes.
scary.
Yes.
That's right.
I completely agree. Pain and cynicism. And this has been prolonged. And so, like somebody mentioned that probably Abraham told Sarah everything that God had relayed in chapter 17, but I don't know. I mean, if your wife is struggling so much, like I know how my husband shields me. I was going through a super painful time recently where it was just like this whole scenario was unfolding and I was just hurting so much over it. Like he just kind of withheld details about that. Like if
Mhm.
he
Yeah.
got information, he's like, we just don't need to know more about that. Like he was like shielding me, right? And so I don't
Mhm.
know. I could imagine that Abraham was shielding Sarah. Sarah, I also could imagine that the two of them, regardless of what they knew, they kind of kept it close. They're
Mhm.
part of this clan. Like, okay, I was thinking about this story in my mind. I have desert sun. I've got like expansive, sand dunes in the in the background in my mind. I've got this tent.
Yes.
I've got a tree, one tree. I don't know if it was a grove, but one tree. And then I've got, Sarah in the tent. But then I started thinking, like, oh, wait a minute. No, 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 they're a clan. It's a whole group of tents, like hundreds and hundreds of people, because we have the story of Abraham and his 318 men. So like those 318 men likely have
Yeah.
families. Like this is a huge clan of people, likely about 1,000 people. And so we've got a lot of different tents, and this is a community of people. And I could imagine Abraham and Sarah being pretty close to the chest with what they share about. Yeah, God says we're going to have a baby.
Right.
Mhm.
Like that is
Right.
I just don't think that when Abraham got that announcement from God in Genesis 17, he went out throughout the whole clan and guess what? We're having a baby
Oh,
next year. I don't think
yeah.
he did the reveal party, set the date for the reveal party. So
No, I think you're totally right. I think, he probably didn't want to tell her. You know how it is when you've been telling your spouse for years that something that God's going to do something for them and they're kind of like, yeah, I'm tired of hearing you tell me that. Like,
yes.
quit talking about it, like the resistance to it. I'm sure she probably didn't want to hear it from him anymore.
Yeah. But I love that God puts a time and a date on it. Finally, right?
Yes.
Finally, twice he says about this time next year at the anointed time. Do you think that's interesting? Or, given the history, this is now 25 years since the
Yeah.
time God made, or 24, since the time God made these original promises that he's going to make of them a great nation, that they will
Mhm.
be blessed, they will be a blessing. What do you think about that timestamp?
It feels so similar and parallel to the way God reveals things in scripture anyway, like you think about how he gives in Genesis the first time he starts talking to Abraham, and then when we see the covenant in 15, like we have a general idea of the promises, but the specifics of what that looks like and when it's
Yes.
going to happen, we don't know any of that stuff for hundreds of years. So it
Yes.
feels like the same sort of slow rolling it out, revealing
Yeah.
over years that God does in the whole story of the Bible. That's how it strikes me, as like, oh, this is kind of how he rolls. Like he gives you a little
Yes.
bit, you got to hold on to what he gives you. He's going to reveal a little bit more later, maybe to the next generation, but it's going to happen. But it's not going to be in this short little, like Instagram size Amazon 2-day we deliver that we live
Yes.
in. It's going to be over a long period of time.
Yes, we are the Amazon generation for sure. And
For
that is
sure.
one of my biggest impressions in studying this. I probably spent 4 or 5 months studying
Mm.
Sarah's life here in Genesis, and God is happy to spend thousands of years
Mm,
to
Mm,
demonstrate his faithfulness to remember and keep his promises. Right?
mm,
Faithfulness is only
mhm.
demonstrated over time. If you meet someone and say, "Oh, I just met a really faithful person," well, that would be weird to say because you don't know that. It takes time for God to
Yeah.
demonstrate his faithfulness, and that's what we're seeing in this story. Like all along, he has intended to keep his promise. There, he has never wavered. They have wavered.
Mm,
yeah.
And I love that there's always been an appointed time. Like it was never a
mhm.
doubt of, it's not like I'll figure this out. I'm going to wait and see how you guys, how faithful you are. None of the promises are contingent upon Abraham and Sarah's faithfulness. In fact, she's kind of despondent at this point. She's not like,
Yes. Yes.
she's not like your poster child for like woman of faith here. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
totally.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's the cynicism, which, like, of course, like Hope was saying, I would feel the same way. She's given into it by now.
Yeah.
It's when Hope talking about coming near, that's what he does.
Yeah.
Even in our cynicism, he keeps coming near. Why? It's not like we deserve it. Like you're talking about,
Yeah.
it's just who he is. He just
Well,
comes
and
near.
how sweet and how personal that he
Hmm.
wanted her to hear it from his lips, right?
Hmm.
He wanted her to hear
Yeah.
this promise from his lips. And I mean, she's going to go from this cynicism, despondence to a year from now, she's going to have a baby. So there's going to be some movement in this
That's right.
story, right? There's got to be.
Yes.
But next, we've got him hearing her thoughts from the other side of the tent flap. I think
Mhm.
that's kind of interesting. What are your thoughts on
Yes.
what he hears her saying or any of that?
Yeah, I think it's like this real human moment of like first her being like, "Yeah, right," and then her being like, "Oh gosh, oh no, they know, right? Oh no, I've clearly been, you know how it is when you get caught being cynical, even right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like Chris was saying,
Rolling your eyes.
she's cynical. Yes.
Yes.
It's like, there's been times where I've rolled my eyes and not even like meant to roll them. My husband's like, you just literally rolled your eyes. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
I
stop.
did.
So it's like so knee jerk. It's so not like she's had 10 minutes and now she's gonna laugh and be like, whatever. She's embarrassed. She's caught. Her heart is exposed. You know how it is when we try to
Mhm.
like dress up our heart in front of other people. And then there's a moment where we're like, oh my gosh, that just showed itself to everybody. I'm totally embarrassed. And now, by the way, it was in front of God. So I can see why it would feel super awkward and it feels very human. And honestly, it feels very relatable.
Yes.
Like, I'm like, oh, girl. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Like
Yeah.
Sarah and I could be friends. She is being real. She's keeping it real and not even meaning to, but it just feels
Mhm.
so human.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I don't know that we've mentioned yet. She is now 89 years old.
I
Yeah.
mean, y'all,
89. I
89
mean,
is the whole thing.
and so it makes sense that she is, here are her words, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? And that word worn out, it's like a worn out, useless old rag that is tossed
That's right.
aside. She's feeling useless, irrelevant. I'm 52. How old are you guys?
48.
About to be 46 in a few weeks.
Well, y'all are just babies.
We're
I'm the old lady
babies.
here in the crew.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And I mean, but I'm feeling it, man. I am feeling like,
But
wow,
you're not wanting to have a baby right now.
oh,
Oh my goodness.
I'm just struggling to play pickleball with my adult children. Like I just want my knees to, cooperate here. And I'm just feeling like things are, I got to stretch before I exercise now. I never used to have to stretch. Like,
Yes.
and just how
Yep.
am I going to feel by the time I am at Sarah's stage in life? Like, just feeling like I can't do as what I used to do. Of course, she just cooked a bunch of food, right? So she's clearly, capable of some things, but, just that feeling of I'm old. It's time has
Yeah,
passed.
I think about her like looking at her own. I mean, I'm looking at my hands right now and the age spots I have on them that I used to see on my mom's hands and be like, "Oh, what's that?" Here they are. And I just think of her looking at her own skin being like, "Are you I'm gonna have a baby? Have you seen my skin? Like this is not happening." It just must I mean, it must have sounded so ridiculous no matter how many times she heard it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that other word that she used to describe after I am worn out and my Lord is old, by the way, she calls him my Lord, even in her private thoughts. I think that's so sweet. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Mm.
shall I indeed have pleasure? Shall I have pleasure? I always thought this was like the pleasure of having a child, but no, this is like
No.
intimacy.
Mm.
Like what's
Yes.
Like
surprising
sexual
about that?
pleasure?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is like she would never say these things out loud. Like this is
Right.
not what she'd be saying if
Exactly.
she knew that the Lord was listening in on her thoughts, right?
Oh, for sure. Which is also what makes you realize that the Bible is real because it hasn't been cleaned up. Like no editor came and was like, "Oh no, we can't put that in. It's just here."
Right.
Why did Moses include it then? He's the general editor on this. Why would he include
I
these
mean,
details?
I think because it shows us what's happening now. Like we're 89. Who knows where they are in terms of like their own relationship and what stress this has put on it. They're not having sex right now.
Yeah.
Like there is no, you know? So then I think that's why it's in here because then something, like you said earlier, something must have changed. And I don't know if I'm getting ahead of you, but I think Sarah had sex by faith.
I do too.
Like something shifted. You know
I
what I'm
do too.
saying?
I do too.
After this encounter.
I completely agree. In Hebrews 11:11, it says that by faith, Sarah, by the power of God, conceived a baby. And I always wondered, like, I was always just kind of a little skeptical of her being included in these great heroes of the faith, like Noah built his boat and Gideon goes into war. And, Abraham even walks 1,000 miles to an unknown place. Sarah has a baby. Well, okay, that's like, I mean, there's so little of what I contribute to having a baby. I've had 3 babies and I just basically ate and slept and the baby was formed within me, right? And
Yeah.
so I was always just a little skeptical. And then after understanding this, I thought, well, okay, there was something she had to do.
Yeah, and how vulnerable is that? Like what Hope said, you don't want to hope again. And that takes a
Right.
whole lot of hope to be that vulnerable with your husband if especially if you haven't been, which obviously she hasn't been. And
Yes.
then
Right.
and then for the purposes of maybe having a baby, are you kidding me? That's like so many layers of vulnerability.
Obviously, sex had been complicated for her, right?
Yes.
So in this culture, sex is to give them children and obviously pleasure, but like it had not done what it was supposed to do. So I'm
Yeah.
sure she feels all kinds of resentment and pain, and sex is coupled with maybe this time I'm going to get pregnant.
Mm,
Maybe. And for all these years, that didn't happen. And so now God is saying, I'm going to give you this, but you're going to have to move towards this thing that's been really painful for me to do this thing. And
Yeah.
so I think that is kind of breathtaking in how God is where he's like, I'm going to have you go back to this pain point
Mm,
mm,
in order for me to show you my faithfulness, and Shannon, what you were saying earlier, how faithfulness is shown over a long time. And so there's been this long pain and sex is coupled with that. And so
right.
fill in the blank for whatever that is for whoever's listening. I mean, it sex
Right.
for different people, but also just whatever that pain point is where you're like, I can't go back. Don't you make me ask me to do that. And he asked
mhm.
her to do the
Exactly.
thing that had so much pain attached to it. in
Mm,
order to complete the promise. And it's just like, what?
Mm,
And so
yeah.
that's why when you were saying you wonder how she's in the hero, that's why. Because Sarah had to stare down this painful thing in order to like step into this promise that God was giving her. And that is brave.
Oh, that is
mhm.
so brave to say after a lifetime of infertility at age 89, hey, babe, want to try for a baby? Like, this is
Oh gosh.
incredibly, I mean,
Vulnerable and like what?
this is by faith, and it's the active kind. I said that in the book. Like, this is like, faith. This is the active kind of faith that is just crazy bold and so many layers. And I love how
Yes.
you brought that hope. Is that part of like your counseling training to go back to that pain point and let's let God breathe his supernatural, grace and hope and all of those things into that pain point? Is that
Well,
just
sometimes I feel like people, it's not in everyone's story. Sometimes God doesn't make us revisit the pain point for healing. Like as far as like going back, I even think about when God's people were exiled, some moved back, some didn't. So not always, but sometimes he does. And the resistance to do that is strong. Like it's like I no. He can ask me anything but not
Mhm,
that. We can talk about anything
mhm,
but not that. We can, and so I'm thinking the very thing that's so loaded is like he's like, no, you're gonna have to go engage in this to get
Mm,
this. So it's I don't think God always does that, but he does
yeah.
do that. And clearly he's doing it here.
Well, it makes me think too about the story of Peter when he
mm,
I keep thinking about when he asks him 3 times, he denies him 3 times, he asks him
yeah.
3 times, "Do you love me?" That in order to redeem that
Mm,
part of their relationship, and you can tell in the text and the language that Peter uses, it's hurtful.
Oh
It's
yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
but he does it, and then on the other side, for what gain? Well, then you see it, that he's
Yeah.
fully restored. So I think about that word restoration
Yes.
and how that is such a part of the story.
It is so restorative. And that has certainly been my experience. Like the hardest things, the hardest relationships, the things that I've most avoided or I've been most, worried. Well, what if? That's where God brings me consistently
Mhm,
in his sovereignty. He
yep.
brings me to the thing that I most am, I don't know, distraught over. I can't imagine it being what I had hoped for. Like
mm,
in relationships, I just know God has brought me, and in counseling to talk through, like, let's go to the very, like, the most vulnerable, the most
mm,
painful part, and let's redeem that. Like, let's talk through that. And I just want to say to our listeners, whatever it is, whatever you've been covering over, withdrawing from, like, God wants to restore even that. He wants to go there with you. And
Mhm.
there is forgiveness, there is restoration. And I have experienced it. God has been so good, but only when I've been vulnerable enough.
The closeness, right? We see God coming near to her in this really vulnerable thing. And I think it's something that can't be rushed, right?
Mm,
Like it's I think so for people that are ready to face it, it's this slow like it's okay. God is patient with us.
mhm.
Like you were saying earlier, thousands of years to show his faithfulness.
Yeah.
Like sometimes healing is slow and methodical and so it's kind of like, okay, you're not ready yet. I feel like God's like, I'll sit here with you. And then
Mhm.
in a minute, we'll
mhm,
kind of, minute or a year, I'll kind of push you a little bit, push you a little more, push you, and so it's this kind of gradual push, but absolutely yeah, it can be the very thing. It's kind of like, when you get a really tense muscle. I don't know if you've had anyone do a massage or press literally down on the part where it's really tight and you can feel it release.
Yeah.
It's almost like that, right? It's like you've got to go to that place that's causing you all that physical pain in order to get the release. And so I do think, but I think it's scary and it can't be rushed. And I have seen people try to rush people to
Mm,
get to their pain point and get
mm,
healing. And I think counseling sometimes does that because that's
yeah.
what we're doing. Like,
Right.
let's
Right.
go. But I think that it's a mystery of why God does it when he does. And here we have Sarah 89. She's not 49, she's not
mm,
50, she's not whatever. And so why? Because this was the time that God
Yeah.
decided to
mm.
do this. And so we can't rush the timing, I think, of that intersection with him on that pain point.
Yeah, so we've got 25 years of God showing his faithfulness, but in that 25 years, God has given her 25 years for her faith to grow to this point.
Right. Of
He
infertility.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think he could have given her a baby on the way to the promised land,
Sure.
if he had wanted to. But he knew. I just think God is he so personally crafts our faith journey and brings us to the point where we are maybe not ready. I don't know that Sarah would ever have been ready, but she needed to be confronted with this right now. And I love that it mentions that the way of women had
Had
ceased
ceased.
to be with Sarah,
Yeah.
and so like the physical possibility has expired. And,
Yes.
and and that's something that I notice about God's promises. God does not make promises that we can keep.
Mm,
He wants all the credit and all the glory for himself. In the book Shaped by God's Promises, I talk about how his promises are like a set of parentheses. You never have one without the other. So you've got he makes the promise, he keeps the promise,
mhm.
and we want those to be in tight. But then he
Yes.
stretches them out. Like the timeline is always further than we could have ever imagined. And over that time period, we start thinking, am I the one who's supposed to get this
Mm,
promise? Like, should it be me? Because that's what we saw in Genesis
mhm.
16. Like, if this is not happening, is it me? And that's
Yep.
not why God spreads this out.
Mm,
He's giving us opportunity for our faith to grow, for us to
mm,
come to the point where we recognize I cannot accomplish what God has promised in my own
mm,
life. And the more spiritually mature I become, the more I realize like I cannot overcome sin on my own. I cannot. All of these promises of God to refine me and to grow me as a woman of faith, like I cannot. The more I just got all mad yesterday because I went to the bank at, 5:29 and the door was already locked. And I was so mad. So mad I got in the car. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, Lord, I am still a control girl. I am still it is so in me. And I just prayed, I need your help again. I need your help. This is not how a daughter of the king should be living, right? This is not a woman
Mhm.
of faith's response. And so it's so that's over my lifetime. That's what has become increasingly clear is that I cannot do this in myself. Any similar
right.
experiences for you?
Right.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, like every day. I mean, so I had a mentor of mine told me when this was 25 years ago, I guess, when I was going on a walk with her and I thought she was amazing, which she was. But I asked her one time, I was like, so if you could say like one thing you've learned over, the last like 30 years of being a Christian, what would it be? And she was like, "Oh, just how overwhelming my sin is. Like, I just
Mm,
see myself." And I remember thinking, "What? Of all the things you could say, that's
mm,
what you're gonna tell me? That's not exciting." But man, the older I get, I totally agree with her. I just am so overwhelmed at like my inability to do the things that I've known for years and years and years. I can't. I just
yeah.
can't do it. I can't hold my temper. I can't hold my tongue. And it becomes more and more clear to me, the
Mm,
more I see of God and his holiness and the world and the kindness that should be, the more I see of myself and that I'm
so
not
true.
that. So
It's so
like,
true.
what in the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got God visiting for lunch. He's talking to Abraham. He tells Abraham, your wife, Sarah, is going to have a child. Not new information to Abraham. We've got Sarah listening from the other side of the tent flap and saying some things she would never say out loud. And then the Lord says to Abram, because she's not in view yet, he says, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child? He kind of, one commentator says he like combs out all of the, he doesn't embarrass her by restating her words exactly as they were. He kind of, brightens them up a little bit. Why did Sarah say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? And then he says one of the most beautiful statements in all of the Bible, is anything too hard for the Lord?
Mm,
Mm.
What do you find surprising about this response of the Lord?
I just think of all the responses he could have had,
Mm,
of what he could have said, of what I probably would have said. It would have been
yeah.
shaming or berating, like, how many times do I have to tell you this? But that's not his posture. And if you think about his tone, about what his tone might have been, I think it matched his words. I don't think it was, "Oh my gosh, is anything too hard?" It wasn't like that. I
yeah.
think it was bold but tender because
Mhm.
that's what he is. And you just think about the his response is just not what we deserve, and this is just another example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I 100% agree. Just the non-shaming and like, stop and think about it, guys. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Like, y'all need to reframe here, and just the way he does
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I love that exchange.
And I think too, like his goal is not efficiency and it's not information. Again, it's like it makes me think about, the story. Hope and I are about to talk about this a lot for a project. So that's why it's in my head. But it makes me think about Mary and Martha when Lazarus dies
Hmm.
and Jesus waits 2 more days and the
Yeah.
conversation that he has then with Martha is stretching her face. It's like asking her questions and pushing her. And it feels cruel in the moment that he's pressing on this delicate thing, like her brother just died. But that's not really what he's doing. He's growing her faith. He's expanding her vision of him in that
Hmm.
moment. And this feels the
Yeah,
same to me.
it
Like,
does.
I'm going to take this moment because my goal is actually that you would see me for who I am. And this
Yeah.
is how that happens. And
Yeah.
that's so kind of him. Like, he doesn't have to do that.
It is so kind. And I love that what prompts this glorious statement that is restated throughout the Bible, is anything too hard for the Lord? What prompts it is not her beautiful faith, but her doubt, right?
Yeah.
It's like how
Mhm.
tender that our doubts are met with such glorious reminders from our good God, So
Mhm.
for in those times of doubting, our tender Lord comes to lunch and he's like, is anything too hard, right? You can put your
Mm.
hope, you can put your trust in me. But he does call her to account.
Yes.
Um, so he's not going to let us get away with just being behind the tent flap thinking our things that we're thinking, right? And it almost sounds like he calls her out because I don't know, it says he's talking to Abram. Let's see, why did Sarah say this? I will return to you about this time, and Sarah will have a son. And then Sarah denies, saying, I didn't laugh. And then he says, no, but you did. He's talking to her at that point. So I don't know if like Abram said, come on out, honey, you gotta like,
Yeah.
or she was, came on her own accord to say, I didn't laugh. I didn't laugh. And he looks at her and says, you did laugh.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
did laugh. But God's going to change that laughter, right? It's like this
Mhm.
bitter scoffing laugh, but
Mhm.
her
Mhm.
son in a year is going to be named Laughter.
Mhm.
Isaac
Yeah.
Yeah. Love that.
changes our laughter. So, we're running out of time here, but I want to get to what difference would it make if we lived like this story wasn't true?
Mm.
That God comes near, that he restates his promises, that he does what he's promised. Like, if we didn't hold on to that, what difference would that make in our life? Is there a teen you know and love who struggles with the endless pressure of comparison? Maybe she drives herself to exhaustion trying to prove she measures up. Or maybe she shrinks back to the shadows, convinced that she'll never measure up. In my brand new book, Comparison Girl for Teens, co-authored with Lee Nienhuis, we're talking about the new face of this age-old problem, comparison. We've got lots of fun quizzes and stories to keep her engaged, and we've broken up the chapters by topic, talking about things that she's got questions about, comparing beauty, comparing femininity, comparing popularity, and more. But ultimately, our goal is to invite your teen to Jesus's healthier, happier way of living me-free. So come visit comparisongirl.com and get the answers that both she and you need on how to thrive beyond measure in a world that compares.
I think we would feel a real anxious, frantic feeling of like, I have got to make everything happen that's going to happen in my life. I have got to heal my own
Mhm.
pain. I have got to control my own destiny. I think it just would feel like this frantic, lonely striving.
Hope, you just described Genesis 16.
Oh,
Yes.
That's exactly where Sarah was 9 years ago. Like frantic, like I've got to produce this thing. I got to take this pain away. I've got to lift myself up with it. Like that's where she was.
mm-hmm.
And yet, so I love the way, and you didn't even realize you were describing Genesis 16, I don't think,
Right.
but
I didn't.
but look at how God responds to that 9 years later. Like that is just
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, isn't it? Did you have a thought, Chris?
Mhm. Yeah, I just was thinking in terms of God, like of course she's hiding in the tent because if there's not patience and faithfulness from him, then you better get it right the first time.
Yeah.
And you better walk the walk and talk the talk. And if you don't, I'd be hiding too.
Yeah. Yeah, but our Bible is not a story of moralism, of heroes who always do the right thing and they get rewarded because they did it right. No, this is a
Yeah.
story of redemption, of people who do it all
Yes.
wrong and take way too long to come to faith, and what God does in our old age, right?
Yep.
Hmm.
I just had a woman tell me, I'm too old to change. I'm too old.
Mm,
You're asking too much. I thought of Sarah, like, no, none of us are ever too old, right? And so
that's right.
this is God's redemption. There is no expiration date.
That's right.
So any false narratives that this story corrects?
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, definitely the one that Hope said of like, I'm the one who's in control. I have to do it all. I'm on my own. Nobody's looking out for me.
mhm.
Figure it out, which is
Yeah.
kind of like the American subtext of like,
Yep.
you better figure it out. You better get yourself together because you're
Hmm.
on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Individualistic. Yeah.
Yes.
For
Any
sure.
others?
I think too, just kind of confronting the idea that like maybe God won't make us have to face our pain points.
Mm,
Yeah.
It's no big deal. And that no, sometimes he does. And that's
yeah.
actually where we see his glory the most. And so I think that, yeah, pushing against that idea that, we can ignore that and be fine,
Yeah. So
or
good.
that we don't have to own our sin, right? That's what I do love about him confronting her again and saying, no, you did laugh. Because it's kind of like when
Hmm.
our kids do stuff they're not supposed to. I know my husband and I often will say to this one kid of ours, just say that you did it. Like,
Hmm.
just own it and we can move forward in a totally different way. And
Yeah.
so the idea that we're not going to have to own stuff is also, I think, a lie.
Yeah. That's good.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I would just add like the lie that God is distant, that he's
Hmm.
uninterested in me, that he's forgotten me. This confronts all of those things because God came to
100%.
lunch at Sarah's
Mhm.
house and he came for her.
Yes.
He came to talk to
Yes.
her. She felt irrelevant and God pulled her into this promise, into the parentheses. No, you're going to be part of this. You're his wife and you're going to have a baby.
Hmm. Hmm.
So how can we live like this is true and remind others to do the same thing? Like, can you think of instances in our life where we need to hold on to this story?
Mm.
First, I want to say where maybe we should not misapply it, which because it makes me like even in my body, I can feel this anxiousness of like, this is not a promise that God's going to give you a baby. And
Mhm.
it's one of those places where I have seen people take this out of context, and that leads to a whole lot of pain for people that it
Uh-oh.
doesn't have to. And so his promises to us, if we are in Christ, are a whole lot of them. And they're things like, I'm going to be near. Redemption is actually going to happen. But we don't know when those things are. They may not be in this life. I have a sister who's laying on her deathbed, and I don't think he's going to heal her.
Mhm.
But I do know that redemption is going to come. And I think holding on to the fact that God's promises to us and his goodness rolls out over a long period of time
Mhm.
is one of those things that this story can give us. And remembering, like, hey, we know that it could be 25 years till anything changes. It could be on the other side of death, but it's
Mhm.
still going to be true. I think that is helpful.
That is really good. And that is certainly the case for Sarah. She went to her deathbed. This promise had been kept, but so many hadn't. And they couldn't have been. You
Yeah,
can't become a nation in your lifetime.
right.
One of the reasons that God's promises rely on him is they extend past our capacity levels, even our life, like our span of our life.
Right.
And
Yes.
I completely agree. In my book, Shaped by God's Promises, I have a little glossary of promises in the back. And I'm like really careful. Like there are some promises, this is one of them, that don't belong to you. They're promised to a
That's right.
specific person at a specific time in the Bible. And we've got to keep an eye on the context. And most of our promises are for the there and then. All of I would say the tangible promises, the tangible things
Hmm.
that we're hoping for, they all are in the there and then. And they are
Hmm.
really great promises. We're going to have no more tears, no more death, no more sickness, like all of those things. Those belong to heaven, the there and then.
Yeah.
But we have a vast number of here and now promises as well.
That's right.
Like you just
Yes.
mentioned, he will be with us. He hears our prayers. We are forgiven. Like put a price tag on
Mhm.
that, right? Like
Right.
Right.
so
Yes.
many rich and glorious promises. And one of them right here in our text, nothing is too difficult for the Lord. Like, I don't know
Right.
that he is going to do the thing that you're asking him to do, but I know he can, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I know he
Right.
can. And we'll let him decide because he's God and we are not. We'll let him decide.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I'm just thinking of the woman who is waiting and has been waiting for so long and feels just irrelevant to
Yeah.
God and
Mhm.
his work and feels like she's the old worn out rag tossed in the
Mhm.
corner and
Yeah.
she's useless. And I just think this story corrects
Uh-huh.
all of that. Yeah. Do you agree?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And tells her this is your worth to God, that he would come
Yeah.
this close, that he would work this specifically, that
Yeah.
he would have these words for you. I've heard so many times people say to me, and I'm sure Hope has as well, I mean, why is he going to listen to me? There are starving children. That's not me.
Mm,
And this tells us like, no, no, no. He hears them all. He doesn't have a priority chart and triage the worst
mm,
off to somebody
mm.
else. This is God, he's endless. And so your specific situation is on his mind
Yeah.
and he comes near in it, no matter
Mm,
where it is on the triage chart. That's not how he works.
yeah. So good. Any last thoughts, Hope?
Nope, just exclamation point to all the things you guys said, that he's faithful, and how that really matters when you feel disregarded. And you may not be able to believe that for yourself yet, but you can have others believe it, and hope for you. But that he shows his faithfulness over a time, sometimes not just in a moment.
Yeah. This is something Sarah's been learning over decades.
Mhm.
God
Mhm.
is faithful. And
Right.
I just hope that our listeners, as they put their heads on their pillows tonight, will rehearse this story and the story
Mhm.
about the God who came to lunch and came to restate his promises directly to Sarah. Is he wanted her to hold on to those promises and be shaped by the promises and to live
Yeah.
like those promises are true. Thank you so much for joining me for this amazing conversation.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for
Talk about
having us.
someone who we can so relate to.
That's right.
Can I just remind you that each of these stories from the Bible is absolutely true? Rather than giving us a list of facts to memorize about himself, God gave us a book filled with stories. And each one helps us to know him and to understand this overarching story that we are all in. So I hope that you'll take some time looking at this story in your Bible. To help you study, I've put together my free Live Like It's True workbook, which includes my false narratives watch list, my story elements bookmark, and more. Live Like It's True is part of the Resound Podcast Network. For more gospel-centered resources, visit resoundmedia.cc. We've got that link for you, along with links to any of the other resources that we've mentioned in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining me, and now it's time to go live like it's true.